que no
¿Sí?
conocen la capacidad de
Sí, yo creo que estamos, pero...
abordar las comunicaciones individuales y que después las recomendaciones en los dictámenes del comité no se toman en consideración.
Y, no sé,
Ahí tienes la clara.
yo le escribo, le digo, Tomás, perdóname.
Visión de esto es lo que yo voy a comentar hoy.
Bueno, tenemos que, yo creo que poner un poquito de alarma.
Sí, claro. Pues no
Eso es nuestro trabajo. Yo también lo voy a hacer. Es verdad que siempre hay mujeres latinas en esto. O sea, las mujeres latinas son líderes en esta área.
Lo que se ha visto en la calle de América Latina,
¿Dónde está pasada? Yo en Yale.
Sí,
o sea,
sí, sí.
¿Tú conocías a Dorothy antes que ella? No, yo decidí poner mi nombre para el grupo de trabajo porque Dorothy me pidió. Y, o sea, hemos trabajado muy bien juntas, pero bueno.
muy bien que haya gente
Sí.
Well,
Sí.
hello, hi, everyone. If I can have everyone's attention, I think we're ready to get this event started. So, good morning. My name is Maria Noel Leoni. I'm one of the founding members of the GQUAL Campaign. And on behalf of my fellow secretariat members and our team, I would like to welcome you all to this event titled The Tipping Point, Why Women's Leadership in International Decision-Making Spaces Can't Wait. We chose this title because we wanted to frame this conversation as a call to action, one that can speak and respond to the urgency of the current global context. We are here at CSW, where women worldwide unite every year to advance equality, sustainable peace and development, and a world free from violence. This year also marks 30 years since the Beijing Declaration affirmed that women's rights are human rights. And yet, despite so much progress, the world around us feels increasingly hostile to these goals. We are witnessing a surge in polarization, conflict, and an alarming backlash against human rights, gender equality, democracy, the rule of law, and multilateralism itself. The very foundations of global governance are under threat, while important global issues remain unresolved, including structural inequalities, the threat of unregulated technologies, and climate change. In our interconnected world, international decision-making spaces are critical. They shape global governance, establish international law, and build mechanisms that protect rights and ensure accountability. They provide a space for leaders and nations to come together to seek solutions to the global challenges that affect us all. Equal representation of women in these spaces is imperative, not just for equality, but to make these institutions more legitimate, inclusive, and effective in representing the world they serve. Our call to action is clear. As the global rule of law faces growing threats, women's equal representation in international decision-making is more urgent than ever. It's not just about fairness, it's the most effective way we have to tackle today's challenges. Data from various initiatives show that women continue to be underrepresented in international spaces. 21 out of 54 international organizations have never been led by women, including the UN, the Organization of American States, which today is electing yet another male Secretary General, the ILO, and all major financial institutions. Only 21% of ambassadors in active duty are women, and women make up just 34% of delegations shaping climate change solutions. International justice spaces are no exception. And GQUAL was born to transform this specific reality. Still today, only 4 out of 10 UN treaty bodies have reached parity. At the UN special procedures, 7 positions have still never been held by women. At the current rate, the International Court of Justice will not achieve gender parity until after 2050. with only 6 female judges compared to 109 men. Overall, the trend we see is clear. The more political, state-controlled, prestigious, and well-paid an international position is, the harder it is for women to access it equally. And our ranking highlights that this is largely because states nominate and vote for more men than for women. So what explains this trend? For us, it's a combination of factors. First, selection procedures lack transparency and clear criteria, which when implemented by a heavily male-dominated network of actors end up favoring men over women. Second, even when there is more transparency, gender parity is not a criteria for appointment, making it an afterthought and not a requirement. Third, there's little data to track representation and keep institutions accountable. And finally, gender bias, stereotypes, and intersectional discrimination continue to shape how we define leadership, merit, and who gets a seat at the table. But if we look at the glass half full, and that is how we want to frame our call to action to you today, change is not only possible, it is happening. This year marks the 10th anniversary of GQUAL, and the accumulated data we have tracked shows that the gender gap in the institutions we monitor has shrunk by 65%. This shift has been marked by many historic firsts. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights went from 0 women to parity. Representation in UN treaty bodies has reached overall parity, though critical gaps remain. And in the special procedures, representation has risen from 39 to 66%, and the number of mandates never held by women has dropped from 19 to 7. So what do we think has worked? For the past decade, our efforts have followed a clear recipe for change. And today we want to use that framework to frame the conversation, to explore if and how it can safeguard the progress achieved and drive momentum in an evolving landscape. So we believe change requires the law, it requires facts in the shape of data, research, and sound arguments, and a diverse group of allies. And we believe that real impact happens when these elements come together, mobilized with a shared purpose, driving institutional change. So first, we need the law. We have always framed our campaign as a women's rights issue. Representation isn't just important or effective, it's an international legal obligation. Women have the right to equal representation in every decision-making space, including at the international level. Grounding this demand in international law reinforces states' obligations to take positive action, strengthens accountability, and anchors the task ahead in the principle of equality. And let's be clear about one thing. Equality is not a zero-sum game. Advancing women's representation does not take away rights from men. It strengthens institutions, justice, and opportunities for all. A key milestone we advocated for was the adoption of General Recommendation 40 by the CEDAW Committee. Rooted in the binding standards of one of the most widely ratified treaties, GR 40, adopted last year, makes it clear that women's right to equal and inclusive representation extends to multilateral and international decision-making spaces. It also defines equality as gender parity 50-50, a standard that must be a permanent and non-negotiable feature of representation. So our first panel today will discuss GR 40 as a legal framework for action and the role of international law in shaping representation, not just numerically, but as a key driver of women's rights. Second, we need the facts and the allies. Data and information are powerful tools for change. Without transparency, inequalities remain hidden, progress is hard to measure, and institutions cannot be held accountable. Promoting data and transparency has been key for us. We have monitored elections and issued vacancy alerts for over 100 international bodies. We created tools like our ranking to track states' nomination, exposing gaps, even among countries with feminist foreign policies. We developed resources like the GQUAL Toolkit, offering clear step-by-step guidance on international selection procedures. And this has shown that transparency and data opens doors. In fact, across all the bodies we monitor, we have seen a 52% increase in women candidates and a 34% rise in candidates from the Global South. But data alone is not enough. It gains power when activated by diverse stakeholders. Our progress has come from collective efforts across civil society, women's movement, academics, diplomats, state officials, judges, experts, and international organizations. We have learned that advancing requires forging both usual and unexpected alliances. Our second panel today will delve deeper into this, exploring how data and multi-stakeholder engagement can continue to drive progress in this particular challenging context. And lastly, we need efforts to focus on reshaping institutions. Without institutional change, progress remains fragile and dependent on individual efforts. Gender parity must become the norm, ensuring women not only have equal access, but also the ability to thrive and influence power equally. We've seen that institutional change in international institutions is possible and directly drives progress towards women's equal participation. Take the UN Special Procedures as an example. We will have a graphic sometime soon. Women's candidacies and appointments actually peaked, reaching gender parity in 2022, following our collaboration with several Latin American states, including Chile, which we will have a representative later today, that led in 2019 to the first Human Rights Council resolution on underrepresentation and to the adoption of a roadmap with recommendations in 2021. So institutional measures do matter. So our third panel will discuss how to navigate institutions changes in adverse contexts with a particular focus on the upcoming and critical election of the next UN Secretary General. So I'll leave it here so we can dive into the conversation with our fantastic panels. And I hope you take this as an open-ended dialogue and an invitation to collaborate and to join forces and drive lasting change together. I now pass the floor to my colleague, Claudia Martin, founding member of GQUAL, to introduce and moderate the first panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Our panel, first panel will deal with the title Beyond Representation, International Law, Women's Leadership, and Advancing Equality. As Maria mentioned, one of the pillars of the GQUAL campaign has been to use the law to promote change at the domestic and international frameworks that regulate access to international positions. We have asserted that the principle of equality and non-discrimination ensure in domestic constitutions and international human rights treaties protect women's right to be represented in international multilateral institutions, especially in those that were created to resolve disputes and deliver justice. In this regard, we have worked with the UN, the Organization of American States, and other multilateral institutions to make the issue visible and to push for changes in the processes that regulate access to international positions. We have used the CEDAW Convention Article 8 as the basis for our advocacy to claim women's equal representation, understood as parity 50-50. And we have worked very closely with the CEDAW Committee in the adoption of GR 40 on equal and inclusive representation in decision-making systems, a landmark document that provides a blueprint for addressing women underrepresentation in every area of decision-making. We are lawyers and believe in the power of the law to make changes. But the changes that we advocate are only possible in an overall system that promotes democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. The panel today poses this difficult question: how do we maintain the law as a relevant tool against backlash and ensure that human rights mechanisms remain strong in countering resistance and push forward in advancing sustained institutional change in international leadership? And to address this very crucial issue, we have two distinguished experts who have played a pivotal role in advancing women's rights at the international level. So I want to introduce them. On my right is Ana Peláez, former chair of the CEDAW Committee. On my left, Claudia Flores, vice chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And we are very delighted to have you here. Thank you very much for joining GQUAL. So we are going to move ahead with the first question for Ana. And I wanted to ask you, we said last year the CEDAW Committee adopted General Recommendation 40 on women's equal and inclusive participation in decision-making systems, a landmark development that defines gender parity as a permanent measure of equality, and that explicitly includes international decision-making spaces within its scope. So my question for you is, how does this new framework contribute to advancing gender parity in international institutions, and what are the most significant developments and the key recommendations for this field?
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you. Thank you for inviting the CEDAW committee for this important side event. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate GQUAL for its 10th anniversary. Your work is essential for the work also of the CEDAW committee. Really, thank you so much. And also, I would like to express our gratitude to take this opportunity also to link the main issue for the discussion with the GR40. In general, we can say without any doubt that when the Human Rights Treaty body adopt general recommendations, general observations for state parties, in general, there are no considerations inside of the United Nations system. This is what is happening now with the GR40. The GR40 is not a driving instrument for state parties. It's an essential document also to guarantee 50-50 parity between women and men inside of the United Nations system. And when I am talking about inside, means that all the system in the United Nations, all the stakeholders must be affected by this new GR in regard with the equal participation women and men. For that, it's necessary to analyze carefully all the internal rules of the United Nations for equal participation, for how to ensure the gender parity also in the decision making in all the systems inside of the United Nations. But then we need to ensure that in the new rules, in the new legislation in relation with the UN bodies, etc., the parity 50-50 is also considered. This is why more than ever we need to ensure an internal strategy in the United Nations to take into consideration the implementation of the GR40, which is essential to guarantee the equality and non-discrimination of women in comparison with men. I would like also to take this opportunity to acknowledge the importance also to have a monitoring mechanism for this implementation. We need to ensure more than ever also that in the process for name new person, new responsibility inside of the United Nations system, in all the system, is the GR40 is respect. So this is also why we need to ensure that we can work together to guarantee the revision of the implementation of this decision. I would like also to take this opportunity to mention that when we are talking about the regulation of fundamental rights for human rights everywhere, this is not something that happened just today. This is something happened that little by little was building because the global context and the political context of the most important countries in the world. The United Nations has a very clear responsibility on that, and more than ever, we need to ensure the fundamental rights and non-discrimination for women in relation with men. I think I don't have more time, but I would like to leave here my contribution to be open for any discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You anticipated another question that I had for you. I have one more question. Regarding measures of implementation, you addressed that, but you would like to add a little bit more. That's I'm going to ask you the two questions first, and then we're going to move. So so if you would like to expand a little more on other measures of implementation to have a real impact in areas such as diplomacy, multilateral organizations, and international justice bodies, that would be fantastic. And also, since we are here for CSW, we would like to hear from you how the GR40 can contribute to the discussions that are taking place this week on the Beijing+30 process, and of course, on a very relevant matter, which is the appointment of the next Secretary General of the UN.
Thank you so much. I think the GR40 expressed very clearly in which area we need to work inside of the United Nations also, but not only for as obligation for state parties. We are talking also about obligations for the United Nations system, and also perhaps also recommendation for the multilateralism system. So, for example, I think it's so important to take into consideration the intersectionality and the diversity of women. When we are talking about women, we need to ensure also this dimension of intersectionality and diversity, because it's clear that the situation for all group of women, particularly for those who coming from the most vulnerable group of women or disadvantaged group of women, have more difficulties also to participate in all this process. We need also to ensure that how we are going to combat the gender stereotype. The gender stereotype also in the international representation of women. And in this regard, I would like also to say that in this moment, the CEDAW committee is working in a new GR41 on gender stereotype with we are going also to consider all these issues. Apart from that, the GR40 is also clear in relation with how to ensure the equal representation for all women in the whole diversity as an extra value. So here we are not talking about just to be named as a woman in different positions. We need also to ensure that the participation, this participation, is not a symbolic participation. It's not, I think the concept is tokenism. I don't know how they pronounce. Sorry about my English. But what we need to ensure is our participation in the decision making is a real participation. It's not a symbolic participation, which is the most of the cases in many areas of life. Then I would like also to take you to tell you the importance of education for the new generation, but also education for all stakeholders. Finally, I would like also to mention how also this participation is linking with gender-based violence, and how women in such a position, particularly in the top position, are more exposed to gender-based violence. So we need to also address this issue. And finally, I would like also to highlight the importance of the international representation of women organizations as GQUAL. This organization, more than ever, need to have enough economical support, enough recognition, enough engagement in all the process for to achieve a better world for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ana. Now turning to you, Claudia. I would like to ask you, in the context where the right to equality is facing increasing backlash, as I mentioned, how can we effectively promote women's leadership in a way that not only advances gender equality, but also serves as a powerful tool to combat inequality and uphold women's rights? And what are you doing at the Working Group on Discriminations to address this matter?
Yes? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you to GQUAL. Thank you. It's an honor to share the stage with Ana Pilau, who is a wonderful leader on women's rights and gender equality at the CEDAW committee. I want to use my few minutes actually to sound a bit of an alarm. I think that we are here talking about gender equality and the rights of women and girls in an incredibly complicated and difficult political moment globally. When I first graduated from law school many years ago, the areas of gender equality were those areas of international human rights that everybody just sort of agreed to. You know, there wasn't, at least on the face of it, everyone said, of course, women and men should be equal, of course there should be gender equality. And even though often those discussions were sidelined, there was still a general agreement that this was a goal of the international human rights system, that CEDAW reflected an important principle of substantive gender equality, and that it was something that we all kind of agreed to. I think we are in a very, very different moment now, a very different moment. And I sit here in the United States. I teach at Yale Law School, and I'm sort of watching our administration question very basic concepts of gender equality, the very idea that society and culture and religion have some kind of role to play over what are the burdens of what it means to be a woman, what are the expectations of what it means to be a man, whether or not women and man are these inherent biological determinations, or whether or not individuals can choose their identities. All of these basic ideas are being questioned, and it's not just here, it's also happening on a global scale. And I say this because I think that the question of women's leadership and the question of gender equality right now is incredibly important. And it's a very complicated one. You know, we had the wonderful presentation at the beginning about the fact that the special procedures, that women in special procedures have increased quite a bit. But the special procedures are also uncompensated care work, you know? I mean, these are positions that are volunteer positions, and so there's a reason why you're finding more and more women in these positions, and it may not be a sign of equality. It may be a sign, actually, of the state pulling back from the international human rights system. I just put that out there as something to think about. So when we are looking at leadership and the progress in leadership, we need to do it in a very, very profound way, especially in a time when these basic concepts are really being questioned. The working group has been trying to sound an alarm in many of our reports. In our most recent report to the Human Rights Council, we noted that there is this global backlash. I don't need to say that to this group of people. I think you're all living and breathing in this space. But really thinking about what that backlash means and what it means to counter the backlash. And so one of the things that we are trying to do, and we have a guidance document coming out in a couple months on substantive gender equality that is actually trying to reinstill a commitment to the concept of substantive gender equality as we see it in CEDAW, but to give it more depth, because a lot of what's happened is that states have kind of made it more of a thin commitment over time. And so we've created this framework called the CREATE framework that is really asking states to do a deep dive into their policies and laws and customs and practices and really look at what is creating barriers to women's leadership. So, you know, when we talk about leadership, and we can talk about leadership within the United Nations, you know, we need to talk about things like girls' education. We need to talk about things like not just having women present, but actually having the political power to do something. Many of you might remember a time when quota mechanisms in political representation bodies were really the thing that everybody was advocating for. And then we found that in many cases, they didn't actually lead to the kind of power that one thought women were gonna have when they were in those positions. So I think there will be a second question, and I will continue, but really the main message being that when we're looking at the leadership of women, we need to really think about it in a profound way and go all the way back to where women are both being educated and supported in their development, and see what leadership actually looks like at the end.
Thank you. Maria mentioned in her introduction that advancing women's rights is not a zero-sum game, and so I wanted to ask you, because we know that the working group has addressed the role of men in promoting equality. So I However, as we all know, we have been hearing from male leaders that gender equality is at odds with meritocracy. So I wanted to ask the work that the working group has engaged on this issue, and how does it connect with the broader agenda of advancing gender equality and inclusive leadership?
Great. So the role of men is actually very, very important to us. In 2023, the working group issued a guidance document on men's accountability for gender equality. And there we discussed the idea that men and boys have a key responsibility and a vital role to play in advancing gender equality. Our next guidance document after the one on substantive gender equality that should come out in over, I think, July, August, is going to be on the family, gender equality in the family. And that's a very important guidance document for us. We've seen the concept of the family being instrumentalized to justify gender unequal dynamics. And also a lack of attention paid to the ways in which men suffer and are harmed through these dynamics and contexts too. So our report to the UN Human Rights Council this year is going to be on care work, and we actually have quite an area in which we're talking about the importance of men participating in care, not just in an accountable, responsible way, but also in a way that allows them to become meaningful caretakers and develop relationships with their children and participate in their households in a way that's actually productive and generative for everyone. So that is one of the things that we have been thinking a lot about. One of the complications that we sort of see in terms of men's participation are these modern concepts of meritocracy and how they come up against diversity. So this is one of the conversations that is happening both at the international level and in a lot of countries, a pulling away from this idea that diversity is a good thing, and actually thinking that if you commit to meritocracy, you will have less diversity, which I think even 5 or 6 years ago we would have all considered to be very absurd, but that is sort of the space that we are occupying right now. And so, that requires a challenge to patriarchal understandings of what, skills and success and good organizational composition actually mean. And we think that men are incredibly important to having those conversations, to thinking about how their work and the environments in which they occupy also are going to be benefited by understanding that diversity and meritocracy actually go hand in hand.
Well, thank you very much to both of you, our panelists, for your insightful contributions and also for keeping to the time. This discussion underscores the crucial role that the law and international legal frameworks play in pushing for systematic change. As we have heard here, achieving gender parity in leadership is not just about numbers, it's about power, governance, and justice. So as a final conclusion, I want to say that this is not just a moment for reflection, but a call for action. We have to remain strong and relevant to counter backlash, and we need to work with broader sectors to protect the rule of law and democracy if we want our aspirations to be equally represented in decision-making to materialize. So I just want to encourage everybody to remain involved, and I'm going to ask my colleague, Viviana Kristesevic, who will take the moderation of the second panel on building a global conversation, data research, and stakeholder engagement. Thank you very much to everybody.
So good morning, everyone. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be participating of this very timely discussion today. My name is Viviana Kristesevic. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Justice and International Law and also a founding member of the GQUAL Campaign. Research, data, and stakeholder engagement are essential tools for meaningful change. And over the last decade, through the GQUAL Campaign, we've seen how fostering global conversations about women's participation in international spaces, shifts in norms and reforms in institutions were facilitated and were backed by research numbers and advocacy. Our research led to strong quantitative and qualitative data. That data helped mobilize a very diverse group of relevant actors in institutions, in civil society, in academia, and it fueled really stronger advocacy, and that led to substantive changes in the legal framework, in the institutional frameworks, and in the reality of many women and women as a group in accessing decision-making spaces. So we know that we have made progress, but there's a lot still to be done. And now we are in a very different landscape. And we have to take stock of that and think now, how are we going to rethink and reshape some of our strategies to respond not only to the resistance that we've always felt, but trying to ensure that gender equality, women's rights, and women participation in international decision-making spaces is possible, but also the strong backlash that we're feeling today and that we're seeing around the world. This backlash to women's leadership makes us more aware that we have to rethink some of the ways in which we're going to adapt, and how are we going to get the coalitions and the processes that will be able to transform some of the discussions that we need to have in order to continue advancing towards that goal. What is the data that we need? And that's why we're here. And we have the privilege of having two brilliant people, these incredible women that will help us go through some of these questions and also enrich our conversation. So let me introduce you to Alison Holder, Executive Director of Equal Measures 2030, a fantastic organization. I hope that you look it up if you haven't already. And Sarah Barton, who is the Director of Women and Girls Equality at the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative, who's also a leader in our field. So just to start, I would like to ask Alison, based on her experience in Equal Measures 2030, why is data essential for pursuing gender equality, and how has it helped to create the advocacy tools and the levels of accountability to push the agenda forward on issues of gender equality?
Great, thank you so much. For those of you who don't know, Equal Measures is a global to local coalition of women's organizations and gender equality champions who believe in the power of data to drive advocacy and action on gender equality. I'm really glad to be here today, especially mindful that just across at the UN, we know there are states actively trying to erase and roll back language that has long been agreed, as was mentioned by some of the speakers. So they're really trying to take us backwards, and so this idea of data for advocacy and action becomes even more important. Our theory of change really says that when advocacy campaigns and mobilizations led by women's organizations and gender equality champions from across sector are backed by data, they're more likely to succeed. And we know that just from the data that Maria showed at the beginning, whether it's campaigns for the next Secretary General of the UN to be a woman, whether it's campaigns for equality in global health sector and leadership, whether it's campaigns and advocacy for Quotas, as we've heard, we know that when those are backed by data, whether that's monitoring efforts, whether that's calling out laggards, those who are not making progress, whether that's celebrating progress where it's happening, that data plays a key role in those accountability efforts. And from our perspective, we see the way that data can make an issue visible, it can galvanize pressure and attention, and it can really strengthen advocates' demands. And we've also seen, in thinking of the discussion around stakeholder engagement, the way that data can create a common starting point or a place for discussion, a common language. And that can be the case whether those stakeholders agree with the data or not, at least it gets you around a table and having a conversation. And if actors disagree about the data, okay, well then let's talk about that. So I think it really plays an important role, especially in a moment like this when we need to draw stakeholders, we need to reach across the aisles, we need to expand the circle of those championing gender equality. Data can be a really important starting point for that. And we've seen our coalition has a flagship data tool called the SDG Gender Index, which tracks progress on gender equality globally. And we've seen the way that that tool can be, again, a starting point for a conversation about gender equality. Where's progress going? What direction are we all moving? And that can really help start conversations with a whole range of stakeholders. So if we take this idea of regression and rollback, we know, everyone in this room knows, all of our coalition members know, feel and experience that regression, rollback, and backlash in their context. But when we have the data that can also show that that is a systemic problem, it's really powerful. So looking at our latest index, which came out in just September, just passed, tracking progress across 139 countries, 56 key gender equality issues, and 3 different points in time. What do we see? Is the regression coming through in that data? And really, yes, it is. So not surprisingly, no country is on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. And more worryingly, 40% of countries are either stagnating or moving in the wrong direction on gender equality. And probably one of the things that jumped out for me the most is that the number of countries who were moving in the wrong direction really jumped up since 2019. And on our index, it's actually hard to move in the wrong direction because you have 56 issues. They're all averaged out equally. So you really need to be moving in the wrong direction significantly and across a large number of those 56 issues for your overall score to decline. So really concerning there. And some examples of countries that were moving in the wrong direction: Afghanistan, not surprising, Belarus, Burkina Faso, Poland, and the United States. So data matters because it helps us to see those bigger pictures. It helps us to see the systemic nature of the challenges. Without data, you might think, oh, well, maybe my lack of leadership prospects, it's just my company. Oh, no, it's just my industry. Oh, no, it's just my country. Oh, no, it's just my family. But data helps us see the connections and the systemic barriers behind all of those injustices.
Alison, as a follow-up question, what does your data reveal specifically about women's equality in national decision-making spaces and leadership spaces? And can you draw any insights for women leadership in international spaces?
Yes, so I think one of the points that I would say around leadership, which links to what Claudia was saying in the previous panel, is for women to even have a seat at the decision-making table, whether that be in international spaces, domestically, within an organization, they have to make it to the table in the first place. And I think the data that comes out of our SDG Gender Index shows the scale of the barriers for women, really basic kind of barriers in their lives that prevent them from having their rights fulfilled, prevent them from even surviving, thriving, etc., are already going to be hampering their prospects of reaching those leadership positions. So we have to situate it in a wider context of the kinds of, the scale of the gender equality barriers that women and girls are still facing. And one thing that comes out of the index that shows that is that nearly 1 billion girls and women are living in countries that on our index get the lowest score, which is called very poor. It's really a failing score. So nearly 1 billion women and girls living in countries that are not even much past halfway towards the targets that would get them a perfect gender equality score. And if we contrast the 1 billion women and girls in that failing score category of countries with the single country that got what we call a very good score, which is Switzerland, which has a population of 4 million. So you've got 1 billion over here in very poor, failing scores, basic barriers of forced pregnancies, early marriage, a lack of education opportunities. If we think of what that means for the prospects for leadership anywhere, let alone in international decision-making bodies, we have to tackle those systemic barriers. I think we can also look within the index. We do have some indicators that look specifically at leadership and representation. Many of them are common to ones that you will have seen, so women in parliament, women in senior ministerial and government positions, and we also track the proportion of women in COP delegations. And what we can see across those measures that we are able to track across all of these countries and time points, broadly getting better, especially women's representation in parliament, not surprising for this group, and COP delegations also becoming more gender balanced. But I think what's really interesting in the leadership measures is they're very fickle, especially when we look at the percentage of women in ministerial and senior government positions. You can have, within one election cycle, go from near parity back to almost no representation. So really showing that need for sustained pressure to maintain any equality gains that have been made. And I would say when it comes to measuring women's leadership in our index and more generally, one thing is that we are continuing to confront major data gaps. This stuff should be easy to measure, quite honestly. In the previous iteration of our index in 2022, we had a measure of women in science, tech, and research positions. That data was not updated, and we were therefore not able to include it in the most recent index. We had a measure of women's representation amongst high courts as judges and justices in the highest courts. We were not able to keep that indicator because the data has not been updated. And I think in a context where we've heard of major data initiatives being terminated, like the DHS data initiative and so many others, the loss of those data sources is taking us even further back from a picture where we already struggled to measure something like leadership and representation, even at a basic global level, let alone what our coalition members really want, which is context-specific data about the bodies that matter for them in their communities. Like our partner in Kenya tracks women's representation on municipal level water boards because that really matters for them locally. So we don't even have the basic global data we want across the range of leadership metrics. Corporate boards can't include it in our index. Women's representation in the media can't include it in our index. So we don't have that, let alone what we also need, which is really locally context-specific data. So we're really struggling because of those data gaps.
Thank you. This is really very, very important, very interesting, and I encourage everybody to look at the data that Equal Measures 2030 is producing. It's really very important for our discussions. And so let's go to Sarah Barton now. Sarah, you have led and participated in many multi-stakeholder initiatives to pursue and foster gender equality with a focus on women and girls. And we would love to hear from you some of the experiences that you've had and what is the value of those multi-stakeholder initiatives in order to move the discussions and the goals forward.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you to GQUAL, and also thank you to the Rockefeller Foundation for hosting us, a longtime CGI partner, and we're very grateful to see others in this room who we've worked with for a long time. So the Clinton Global Initiative is a part of the Clinton Foundation. We really help stakeholders across sectors to develop and cultivate programs and projects that will tackle some of the world's greatest challenges. For CGI, with respect to our women and girls work, we really think about mainstreaming and prioritizing women and girls across all of our focus areas. So we look at this as a through line and an essential component of the work, whether it's on climate, economic inclusion, humanitarian response, or health equity, and then there's sort of additional kind of pockets of work that transcend multiple. Let me ask a question to folks in the room. Show of hands, how many of you have partners for your work? How many of you have partners that are in a different sector? Okay, So we focus a lot on multi-sector partnership because we kind of approach the world as a, there's 3 legs of the stool. There's probably more like 10 legs of the stool. But for the sake of argument, government, private sector, and civil society / third sector. One of the reasons that we really look at commitments to action, which is the sort of name we use for the projects our stakeholders engage in through that lens, is every entity and every sector has its own core competencies. And we believe that rather than having organizations create work that sits outside of their core competencies, it makes more sense and you kind of get further by partnering with people who already have those core competencies. We also see that, for example, government has sometimes capital available to de-risk a private sector pilot project. And that can go a lot further towards both the company's objectives and the government's objectives. And at the end of the day, if that's serving the sort of cause of gender equality, that's good. We like that. It costs less and it works better and faster sometimes. Not to say that's not without challenge, but we've looked at, of the 4,600 commitments in our portfolio since our beginning in 2005, at our 10-year mark, we looked at a retrospective analysis, and it showed that commitments that had partners were more than double as likely to succeed and outperform their performance targets as solo sort of ventures. So we really encourage partnership because we think that it basically helps to increase the probability of success. That being said, it's also sometimes essential just for the nature of the work. So for example, we have a commitment in our portfolio that an organization made last year. It's a nonprofit, and it's looking at women's political participation in the United States, both from a candidate perspective and also from a voter perspective. One of the biggest challenges, it's been referenced before, but that we all know is really increasing in its severity and intensity is online violence and harassment, particularly towards women who are holding or seeking office, but also dis and misinformation has a really, really deleterious impact on voters. So this organization is working with very quietly with corporate partners who have an interest in understanding better how to combat with their own product lines dis and misinformation in their AI tools. So they're working to basically identify through news and media and through sort of the online environment, how do they better understand, because it really hasn't been well measured, what the impact and incidence of dis and misinformation is. And then, but the nonprofit, they're democracy experts. They understand how to build tools that really reach both candidates that are in a training pipeline, whether they're running for a school board seat or for president. And at the same time, they also need to be equipping women voters and people who are trying to mobilize voters with basic literacy on what this dis and misinformation ecosystem is and what it means. So they both have different insights. These tech companies understand their proprietary tools, and in some cases, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they understand AI better than a lot of nonprofits that are active in various spaces because they're just developing it so rapidly. So that partnership is a way to accelerate some solutions and also to test and pilot them. So I would say stakeholder engagement is really important for kind of the acceleration of solutions.
That's very interesting, and your example also gives me the perfect segue to the following question, which is how can these multi-stakeholder initiatives actually help for the goal of ensuring that women can participate in leadership positions and in international positions in a way that is equitable and inclusive?
This is one of my favorite questions because I always like to ask, does anyone ever ask men about that? Like, what makes them better? But the data shows, if we look at the data, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, that when women hold leadership positions, the outcomes are better. We look at, I've seen some really interesting data on women's participation in policymaking, both from a sort of civil society and a leadership perspective. You see that women who are leading countries in policy development, particularly through some of the legal measures that they tend to advocate for, they generate more better economic outcomes. They're combating poverty. It's sort of the nature of having an eye towards inclusive policies, which we know because of data result in better outcomes. So it's really important to look at how do we support women's participation in policy and decision making at both the national and also the international levels. And I think it's a really good point that you referenced about what are the structures that enable that. We know some things, right? Paid leave, access to childcare, pay equity, transparency, norms, combating norms is really difficult to do. But there's also a lot of research to suggest that particularly, you're right, the elected leaders, it's fickle. It's very difficult to really intentionally address, especially in like parliamentary or sort of federated structures, how you can do that. It has to be done kind of across the board. But within international systems and also policy making or civil society apparatus, it's easier to have targets. Even if you don't refer to them as quotas, it's essential to have a commitment, and you see the outcomes reflect that commitment of organizations, institutions, states to sort of saying this is a priority, because we're making the business case in a lot of ways to say, men, you will be less poor if you have women who are in leadership positions all along the chain. Sometimes you have to dumb it down to that level. I wish we didn't have to. But I think a lot of times when you can kind of get on board with that sort of perspective, it helps to drive forward progress. And we know that the outcomes will be worth the effort.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think that we are all grappling with what to do in this context. And clearly through our conversation and the previous panel, it is important to see how some of the backlash is strategic, is a trend, and it is global. Sometimes when you are in a specific country, you think, okay, this is it, and this is what's happening to me. But we are seeing it at a global level. And because we are in this very adverse context, we really need to be sharper, we need to adapt, and we need to hone our strategies. We have to think and rethink what we're gonna take from the tools that we have, but also how we're gonna move in this new situation. And something that is very clear is that research and data are part of the solution, that they help us expose some of the gaps and bring people at the table. It helps enrich our conversations. You know, it's not just opinions, is the data and discussing what the data can bring to the political process. And it can help hold institutions accountable. It can support creating initiatives because you can get a better idea of the different stakeholders that are relevant for the whole process and the pipelines for equality, for example. Engaging multiple stakeholders is also a key aspect of responding to the challenges that we have, because having people that can help from different sectors accelerate solutions, think creatively, pull their own strings for solving aspects of a common problem and create new alliances is also what we're gonna have to do better, I think, in this specific context, nationally, locally, regionally, and internationally. So we think that these are critical catalysts for change and tools important for adapting. But we also need to keep on thinking about how we crystallize and how we create some of the more powerful levels as well, along with the community, along with the data and the research, to push forward the conversation. And here we have another panel that is called Beyond Numbers, Transforming Institutions for Inclusive Leadership, where we will be discussing this actually structural need to reform and safeguards for inclusive participation in international spaces and also in leadership spaces for women. And I would like first to thank our brilliant panelists for contributing and sparking so many ideas and bringing so much to the conversation. And I would like to introduce my friend and fellow jurist and colleague, Alejandra Vicente, who's also a founding member of the GQUAL Campaign, so that she can spearhead the next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's really fantastic to be here among so many friends. Thank you for those of you, that 10 years ago were already with us, and then for all the friends that we've made through the process. It's really, I think, one of the most rewarding experiences of working with GQUAL is to know that we are not alone. And we've heard in the previous panels, the first one, even in this adverse context, we have the law. For women to access decision-making spaces, this is not an aspiration. It's not something that we should even be discussing in terms of strategies of governments. It's a legal obligation. And I hope that we keep that as a tool as we go forward in this context that we are living today. And then in the second panel, we heard about the power of data. And one of our friends in the GQUAL campaign always says something that I love, and it's that data is women's best friend. And I really think that's true. And for GQUAL, it has been fantastic to show data. And through that, we've managed to actually, convince policymakers, diplomats, institutions, etc. In this third panel, we are going to explore the role of institutions and states. Why states? States are key stakeholders, obviously, and they can make things happen. And so it's really important to know what measures they can take to make progress in this regard. And obviously institutions, so many of us, when I look at the room, colleagues who work with the International Criminal Court, colleagues who are looking at the upcoming elections in the International Court of Justice, institutions have to take the lead themselves in promoting change from within the organization. We have so many female colleagues who feel that they don't have the enabling environment inside of the institutions to really grow professionally and to be able to access those leadership positions. So I'm very grateful that we have another fantastic panel, and I'm going to introduce the three speakers: Ambassador Carla Serasi, who is Director of Multilateral Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile. Welcome. Ria Abada Chiongson, who I've known for a long time, even though I got stuck saying your name, but she's a senior legal advisor of the International Development Law Organization. And Claudette, welcome. Claudette Seguras is an MS in Global Affairs candidate at NYU Center for Global Affairs. I'm going to start with Ambassador Serasi. As Maria mentioned and other panelists, for us at GQUAL, one of the main points or entry points for women to access positions is obviously the nomination process by states, because for women to access in the first place, states have to nominate and states often have to campaign for them. So this has been one of our strategies, to look at those nomination and selection processes and see in which ways we could collectively improve them. I want to ask if you believe that this is a good strategy, that it's a good approach, and what type of measures can states take to use that as a way to promote women from accessing leadership positions.
Thank you very much, Alejandra, and I would like to really thank GQUAL Campaign for organizing this important discussion, and to my distinguished colleagues in this panel. Taking place in this conversation on equality and governance, I think is very timely, and we really need it at this time. We certainly agree with GQUAL's approach towards to have more transparent and parity-oriented processes within the system in nominations and election processes. I wanted to share that the last couple of years actually has been since 2022, Chile declared that has a feminist foreign policy, and we have seen many changes within our foreign ministry. We have worked on to promote the equal representation of women in international organizations, promoting female candidates for key positions. In an effort to have an equal representation of Chile in this international organization I was mentioning, we selected 7 people who were being put forward in a personal capacity, and of those 7, 4 were women and 3 men. I'm going to just mention the names and the positions to give you an idea. So the first one was Lidia Casas, and she was running to become commissioner in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Then Jorge Bermudez, he was running to be external auditor of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. Both elections were held in 2023. Then we had Mr. Jorge de Contes. He's a member of the United Nations now Committee Against Torture, CAT, and that was also in 2023 towards the end. Then Maria Ignacia Vial, elected member of the Governing Council of the International Institute for the Unification of Private Law, UNIDRAT, that took place in Rome. And then Claudio Troncoso, candidate for the Inter-American Juridical Committee for the period 2025-2028. Patsili Toledo, to the Committee of Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the elections were held last year. And finally, Claudia Baratini, she was elected for the position of Cultural Secretary by the Council of Delegates of the Italian Latin American Institute. This was just held in February this year. From those period of time that I'm describing, of those candidates, 5 were elected and 2 were unfortunately not, but these are elections, how they happen. But important is the process. All these elections were carefully chosen. They were, I believe, very important. I would like to perhaps just mention 2 of them. The first one of Dr. Patsili Toledo was very historical because it was the first Chilean ever to be elected to CEDAW. Not the first candidate we had. We had a candidate in the past, but it's a very competitive election. But in this time, we were able to move forward. And I think part of that is also the commitment of the foreign minister to support the candidate. So she traveled many times. She had a brochure. She had everything she needed to be able to. And also our networks of embassies work very hard in moving forward this process, as well as in Capital, my division, who handles the candidatures. We were able to also to support her. And the second one, Maria Ignacia Vial, because she was the first Chilean ever to elected to UNIDRAT. And it's also extra pleasure that she was a woman. So through these candidacies and extensive work carried out by both our teams at the Foreign Ministry, all the embassies, especially the missions here in New York, in Geneva, demonstrated the commitment to address structural causes of gender gaps and inequalities, even in a decisive and strategic manner. And also those campaigns were a concrete way to promote feminist foreign policy, to say we are beyond words, we are going into action. And it should be noted that Chile also promoted initiatives within the UN and other multilateral organizations to ensure the equal participation of women in the decision-making process, as I was mentioned at the beginning of this event. Also, we have a work in universal human rights system, but also we are working besides the multilateral United Nations at also the regional level and local level. And I would like to share in particular one best practice that I understand you were interested in, which was what we did to select the candidate to be a commissioner for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. This took place in 2023, and in accordance with the provision of the American Convention, we have to propose candidates who have high moral authority and recognized expertise in the field of human rights. So following the recommendation by many organizations, we were able to move forward in this area, try to have greater transparency and objectivity. And how we did that, we created a committee that was composed by several authorities from the Foreign Ministry, but also people who are working in other areas of government and even some independent institutions like the Children Ombudsman or the Human Rights Institute. And lastly, we were able to interview all the candidates, but the short list was 2 women and 2 men. And we make sure there was parity in that process, and we sent all the information for the Foreign Minister who made the final decision. And at that time, we had Dr. Lidia Casas, a great candidate that unfortunately was not elected by 1 vote. But the important thing is the president. So since that, all the other elections that we are going to hold for the commission will be done in the same way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very inspiring to hear your presentation because it shows that change and having more transparent processes is something achievable if there is political will to do it. And this is really important we cannot forget that while some states are trying to take us back, other states are trying to make progress. So thank you very much for that, and we hope that many others will follow the good precedents and practice that you have presented here. I want to now go to Rhea, because as we mentioned before, it's not just about having women, in a tokenistic way, as Anna mentioned at the beginning, but really enabling them to grow and to become leaders within the institutions. And IDLO has done a lot of work on institutional measures to promote gender equality within the judiciary at the national level, but also in other decision-making processes. So I want to ask, what are some of the best practices that you've seen or that you can recommend in this regard?
Thank you very much, Alejandra. And it's an honor to join you all today and address this very important topic. Of course, before I start, congratulations to GQUAL on its 10th anniversary. I think many of us were actually in that room when it was launched here in New York. And also, happy International Women Judges Day as well. So I work for the International Development Law Organization, IDLO, and it's a intergovernmental organization exclusively devoted to promoting the rule of law. So very early on, I think for decades now, IDLO has actually been supporting women's leadership and participation in the justice sector. I think it just comes naturally since we're involved in all aspects of justice delivery. So we believe that effective participation of women in all aspects, national and international, is an integral part of their participation in public and political life and is a valuable component of governance. Their participation at international level is as important as their participation at the national and local levels. Of course, participation at international levels is also enhanced when you have women at the national level who are also in leadership position and meaningfully participate in all aspects of governance. So it enables us to also have a wider pool of candidates for international positions. Of course, I think we all know in this room that despite their contributions, women remain underrepresented in leadership positions in the justice sector. There have been improvements. So for example, in European countries, women represent about 41% of judges in national Supreme Courts, but only a mere 25% of court presidents. And this is despite the fact that they outnumber men in lower judicial roles, such as judges and magistrates. So our work has highlighted really an urgent need for institutional changes that not only ensures women's accession in the justice sector, but also creates a supportive environment where women can lead, thrive, and drive transformative change. So our decades of work in this, we came up with some, I believe, recommendations or that we would like to see institutions pick up. I think first, and this is not new, I think most of the panel today have already discussed it, we really must address the critical lack of comprehensive data and information on women's leadership and participation in the justice sector. So this gap not only hides the true extent of the problem, but also undermines efforts to advocate for a more representative judiciary, making the push for meaningful reforms more challenging. And we know that states collect data. Many actors also collect data on women's participation in the justice sector. However, there are several challenges. So for example, most national data is not publicly available, nor is it regularly monitored or kept up to date. Second, it is always not disaggregated by court type or level. Very few states keep data on retention rates in the profession, and where they do, it's not disaggregated by sex. States often tend to publicize data only at the highest courts, since the composition of these courts attracts more public attention. So there is a lot of challenges when it comes to data. One thing that we can look into is perhaps strengthening the global and national data collection platforms, such as SDG69.7, the indicator that looks into women's participation, including in the judiciary as well, and hopefully collect and analyze a wide variety of data, as it is key to making meaningful and targeted progress in this area. Second, we must ensure that legal policy and institutional frameworks guarantee equal opportunities for advancement of women in leadership positions. So one of the things that IDLO did in Kenya, together with our partners, we partnered with the National Gender and Equality Commission and the International Association of Women Judges, the Kenya chapter, to conduct a gender audit of the judiciary. So this is also in cooperation with the judiciary, of course. And there were several recommendations that came out from that audit. We also supported those recommendations, including the development of a sexual harassment policy and a gender mainstreaming policy for the courts, which has been adopted by the Judicial Service Commission. So it's really critical to create that framework. And I think one thing that I also wanted to highlight is that there's a lot of focus on women in formal justice institutions, such as women judges, but it's also important to empower women in customary informal justice systems. So what we've done in Somalia, we actually worked with the Somalia Ministry of Justice to create a national ADR standard operating procedures. And because of this, we managed to raise the number of women. Hopefully it gets to 50%, but we have about 22% of adjudicators, with 32% holding deputy chair positions. So these are some of the things that we had to do together with partners to be able to move recommendations into action. I think third, very quickly, we must support women's professional networking and mentorship associations at all levels. So these associations can help women in the justice sector strengthen their professional connections, not only locally, but also globally. And this is very important, especially for young women in the justice sector. So young women judges, prosecutors, and lawyers. Fourth, we must reform legal admission and appointment procedures. I think this also came up in the discussions around international processes. So unfortunately, at the national processes, those also happen. So we must ensure that they are transparent, fair, and based on merit. We must address the propensity for in-group bias by male gatekeepers mostly, and male-centered definition of what constitutes relevant legal expertise for admission and promotion. And then fifth and last, we must have the political will to support a favorable legal and social context for women in the justice sector. So this includes reforming discriminatory laws, changing economic policies, ensuring that social norms and stereotypes do not hinder women from accessing professional development. So we need political will to create not just a critical mass of women judges, but we also need to create a critical mass of justice actors, lawyers, prosecutors, as well as a critical mass of people who will support women's leadership and participation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhea, for all of those concrete measures, and congratulations for the work that IDLO does with the national judiciary, but also many other groups to promote this topic is really important. And now coming to another essential issue, and in the one of the first slides, we said 54 international organizations, multilateral organizations, 21 have never been led by a woman, and obviously one of them is the United Nations. We are celebrating 80 years of existence this year, and it has never been led by a woman. So I'm really thrilled that we have Claudette Segura with us today, because her, together with other fellow students, have been tracking the position of UN member states when it comes to electing a next Secretary General. And so I want to ask, what are the main findings of your research, and also what concrete measures you think would be necessary to make this a reality?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Claudette. Thank you, Alejandra, for having me and GQUAL. Thank you. I'm a researcher and graduate student at NYU, and I'm working on tracking state positions on women, on electing a woman SG. So just a little bit of a background. I've been working on this for about 6 months. We're collaborating with 1 for 8 billion and another organization called GNWP. We are trying to figure out, like, as we know, the UN is 80 years old, and 88 years of only male Secretary Generals, so only a few women have ever been elected, none of them, nominated, none of them have been selected to date, and the decision is made by member states, as Alejandra was just mentioning. So we decided to look at what they're saying and see, like, what are they thinking about electing a woman SG. So we are using official statements or statements by regional bodies. So I'm going to show you the methodology of the way that we did this. We classified the statements in different categories. The highest classification is a very strong one, which is highlighted in dark green. And those are statements that usually they do say that, yeah, we should have a woman SG, but they also include, like, some sort of action. Then we have the strong classification, which is statements that only mention, like, oh yeah, we should have a woman SG, but they're not as strong as the very strong classification because they don't really have an action or an idea of how to do this. Then we have the indirect or implied classification, which is statements that might mention something about gender on their statements, but they don't really say anything about electing a woman SG. And then we have the opposed classification in red that is only for supporting male candidates, or this category that also just rejects prioritizing the selection of a woman SG. Then we have the no mention category, which are countries that haven't said anything about the topic at all. And I wish I could show you the interactive map, but I know that we don't have a lot of time. So basically what we do is that we track or we do all the data analysis on a spreadsheet, and then we converted that into this tool that is the one on the right. So it's on a website. I can share it with you all when we finish. But it's basically you hover over a country and you will be able to see what was the statement that they shared, or when was the date, who said it, etc. You can see all the information, and then the different colors, of course, for those different statements. So I want to share an example with you. We have Costa Rica, a very small country. You're not going to be able to see it. But during the November 4th meeting, it was the ad hoc working group meeting on November 4th. They said, we must elect a woman. The General Assembly could refuse to accept a candidate, urging the Security Council to recommend a more inclusive group of candidates. So that's a very strong statement, because they mentioned something like, oh, the Security Council could just reject a candidate if we want to have more gender equality and things like that. And then the ACT group statement that was given in February 20th, just maybe 2 weeks ago. The ACT is a group of countries that are working on transparency and accountability and all these things. It's actually 27 countries. Chile is one of them. And the ACT group said that member states should consider only nominating women. So that is also another very strong statement, right? And then we have the opposite side of the table. Russia in red, during the February 20th meeting, they said that gender is one of the criteria, but it shouldn't play a decisive role. So we have here an example of a country that is very early on giving a stance on what they want for the next Secretary General to be. So, and many other examples. I know that there's not a lot of time, but 28 countries are in the very strong classification, 64 are in the strong classification, 88 indirect or implied, 1 is opposed, and 12 still have not said anything. So what we can see here, although we have certain countries giving or trying to do something really about it, the majority of them are still not quite there yet. So we need to change this, of course. We have one country in the post category, and I have some recommendations to share. I guess one of them that I could say is we should be transferring indirect support into actions. We have 45% of the states here not giving a strong statement or really giving much. So we should start or help them to adopt a cleaner, stronger language. We should be also engaging with the no-mention countries. Still 6.2% of them. Maybe reach out to them. Maybe start this dialogue. Maybe even share the map if we want to do that. And also maybe try to build a coalition. We have, as I just mentioned, 28 countries that are in the very strong category and 64 in the strong category. So maybe if we do something to unite this front, we can grab other countries to join them and join this movement. So last but not least, address the opposition. We have one country there, maybe start or a strategy, plan something to interact with them. That would be a good option. So those are my key findings for now.
Thank you so much, Claudette. And which one is the opposing country?
Russia.
Yes,
Russia.
Okay.
Sorry.
Because I think it will be super interesting. This is fascinating research, and congratulations and thanks for doing it. It will be super interesting to see where the Security Council states stand as well on this ranking. But I want to get also reactions from Ambassador Terasi and Andrea, 2 minutes on this topic of the election of the next Secretary General.
Thank you. I wanted to really congratulate Claudette for the initiative or for doing this fantastic study. I think it's very interesting to see it in numbers and in a map. I hope the green continue to grow. As you know, Chile is very committed to, as part of the very strong, was promoting this issue. We certainly believe this is a time that we have to have a Secretary General, a Women's Secretary General, and I think it's very important to continue to reach out to other countries who have perhaps not given enough analysis and continue to create partnerships. We have seen that this is the way it works, slowly building up with an idea and continue with reaching out. But I wanted to also mention that the important role of civil society and the academia in this also promoting the issues and reaching out to others. And I think it has also, in my previous example of the candidates, civil society has also helped us during those campaigns. And for this campaign, which is going to be bigger, much more complex than a normal election, it will certainly be key to continue to have these conversations and strategize for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rhea?
Yes, maybe I'll start with not a joke, but an anecdote. I remember maybe a decade or so ago, I started rewatching those Superman movies, and Superman flies into the UN, and then there was a woman Secretary General. And I remembered saying, oh my God, there's a woman Secretary General. And my friends were saying, what about the flying man, right? So I really hope that we'll get to see a woman Secretary General before we see a flying man. But anyway, congratulations, Claudette, for this very informative study. I think I just wanted to highlight 2 things. One is on merit. I think we all know that merit doesn't mean lowering standards or sacrificing quality. It's about ensuring women have the same opportunities and resources and support to be able to demonstrate their capacities, but also recognizing that talent and leadership comes in many forms. And I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight is role models. I think it's very important as well for us to see women in leadership position because it inspires, it helps shape ambition, not just for women, but also for their children, and what they can be and what they can, what they can achieve as well for themselves. So role models, when you have women in leadership positions, it really counters stereotypes and social norms that says what can and cannot be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the three of you for helping us explore this topic, and I think it's very clear that we need that change in institutions because it makes them stronger, it makes them more impactful, more efficient, so it's really good for everyone that women get to the leadership positions. And also we need to keep working with states. That's also very clear coming from this panel. We need to keep working with states to promote more processes, as Chile has done, for transparent and nomination and election processes that are a platform for women to access these positions. So thank you, the three of you. And now I think that we are going to have some concluding remarks, which are going to be delivered by our friend Judith Arenas, who is the Executive Director of APCO. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to let everyone get settled and get back into their own seats. But thank you. As we conclude this session, I really want to thank all of you for taking a moment to actually be here with us to reflect on what truly are the remarkable achievements of the GQUAL campaign. And also, we must not forget the broader challenge of the ongoing struggle we face today for gender equality and women's rights. 10 years ago, like many of you in the room, I was together with so many of our friends inside the UN headquarters when the GQUAL campaign was actually launched. And at the time, I do have to say, I thought, great campaign idea, love the branding. All my kind of comms instincts came out, and I thought, but this is going to be tough, and this is going to be challenging. So I think the fact that we have made so much progress in 10 years is actually not a lot when you actually think about advocacy and policy advocacy that requires changing so many fundamental things. It's remarkable that we're here today, and I think the statistics that Maria showed us earlier today just demonstrate what can be done when we put our minds to it and when we actually work in partnership with stakeholders, when people invest in providing funding to such initiatives. So to those of you who have supported the campaign, thank you. To those of you that are partners, I really appreciate the work that has been done. I think we also have to recognize that one of the critical things that the GQUAL campaign did was unify why parity for women in such bodies was important. Because I'm sure that if you're in the room, you don't need me to persuade you about why gender equality is of importance and why it matters. You all know this. But I think we had all been working in silos. Some of us had been working on, like Ria, I was with IDLO at the time, we had been working about women in the judiciary. There were other women that had been working about much palatable things such as STEM and getting women into positions of leadership in business. But we needed to recognize that the challenges around women in leadership positions and women in these kind of bodies is critical. Why? Because you all know it, but because ultimately the decisions that such bodies take impact the rest of society. And that's what was essential for us to know. But I think the issue about how we've seen the increase of women in international bodies is just fantastic, and I think it's testament to the tireless effort that everyone has been putting here, not just those of you who are in the room, but all the other countless partners around the world. I think, again, reflecting on the 10 years, trying to do that is tough because there's so much that you can think about. But I think this issue about how GQUAL has advocated successfully for normative and political commitments to address gender imbalances is essential, because I think for those of you and those of us who have been at the bartering end of when you actually have to get people onto such committees, we know that it's all about the trade and the deals. You're going to barter one position for another position or in exchange for something else. And having to bring this up to a principled decision-making that this isn't just about the traditional barter that member states will do when you need to get a position elected, but that this is about the ultimate benefit that society needs to have because it's the right thing to do, but it's also because it benefits all of us. As someone said earlier, this is not, and it's important to emphasize this, because of where we are standing in the moment in time and geographically, that this is not something that disadvantages men. This is something that benefits the entire society. But you know, the journey is far from over. The challenges against women's equality remain. They're formidable. There's so much that needs to be done that I think it's a little bit daunting. And I think we need to just figure out why this is important also when we look at the context and we look at the global picture that impacts us. When you look at women in politics, women still only make up 27% of parliamentary seats. When you look at women in business, only 28% of management seats. I can go on about how long it takes us in the year to achieve gender parity in salary with men, and it's much more exacerbated if you are a minority. And of course, it's already been brought up, and I'll talk about this in a second, the unpaid care work. But also social norms and cultural practices persist, and it is very often those practices that are also impacting in this work that we mentioned. I really wanted to now pick up on a couple of the points that were made in the overall discussions. I can't remember who it was that said that made the parallel with unpaid care work when you're actually talking about, for instance, the special procedures. As someone that supports one of the special rapporteurs, I fully agree. It is truly a labor of love if you want to be involved and be a special rapporteur and you don't have an entire institution behind you, because then you have to rely on volunteers like myself, which are not as good as remunerated people that you can help you. But that is very important. I want to also talk about leadership and appreciate the leadership of countries like Chile, because it is exactly countries, not ideally those that would have a full feminist policy, but not necessarily only those, that really show us what can be done when you have the right leadership in mind and you want to do that. And while the leadership does have to lie within all of us, it is ultimately, we are working in the member state-led process, so it is countries like yours that can make a significant difference. I want to thank all of those who have worked on data, because the importance of data cannot be understated. We cannot talk about what we cannot measure. If we do not have those key figures, it becomes very difficult to have those conversations. Again, societal norms and societal context is going to be something that we are going to have to deal with even more now. It's going to be a pressing issue for all of us, and it's going to require a lot of resilience, it will require a lot of patience, and it will require us having to flex to be able to adapt our language to make sure that we can continue to be successful in our campaign. I think it would be naive of us to overthink or to think that we can continue business as usual. We are going to need to think very smartly, very strategically, and very creatively about how we tackle some of these perception issues. Sarah, I want to thank you for bringing up the point around the evolving technological environment. As I mentioned, I support the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, one of those mandates that was established 30 years ago and is only now being led by a woman. So that, again, testament to the GQUAL campaign as a good example. But one of those things that would not have happened if you did not have a woman in that position is that you would never have ended up with groundbreaking work that looked at gender and freedom of expression. And that also, in turn, has led to look at how women in positions of leadership face unprecedented levels of online attack and scrutiny. And so, again, another call that I would have to make of all of you is do support those women who are in positions of leader, because they need it. They need voices like ours, even though it may seem like a never-ending battle to tackle the disinformation that is out there. Everyone can contribute to this. we have always talked about, in the post-COVID era, about the backlash against women's rights. And I think that is now even more true than ever before. We have talked about how many decades it will take us to achieve gender parity. I want us to end on a positive note, so I won't dwell on those negative sides, but I think this regression underscores the urgency of the mission that GQUAL has put to us today. And we have to remain steadfast in our commitment to gender equality, recognizing that when women and girls can rise, we all thrive. It's also a call for a commitment to action by all of us. I would not be doing justice to my days in human rights campaigning if I didn't tell you that everyone can contribute to this and everyone can do something. We have to celebrate the achievements, but we also need to acknowledge the work that lies ahead. And the GQUAL campaign has shown us that change is possible, but it requires our continued dedication and collective efforts by all sectors of society. How many of you are here from the private sector? Okay, so it's me and Nicole, great. So Nicole co-leads APCO's gender practice with me. So this is a good call. Maybe this is one of the things that we take forward, but you know, I now am in a role in the private sector and want to reinforce that this issue of representation matters to all of us. And we need to make sure that we get more actors around the table that will support this. Together, we can build a world where gender parity is not just an aspiration, but a real reality. And so to close, allow me to thank the Rockefeller Foundation for hosting us in such a wonderful space that is conducive to such a dialogue. But more than anything, please join me in thanking the GQUAL Secretariat for the tireless work that they do in gender parity and for many more achievements to come. Thank you. And I think with this, we are done. So thank you so much for all your time.